For Pete's sake. I'm Kat.
And I'm Liz, and we're Chatting Catholic.
We're self-study theologians of the domestic church.
And we love reading what the Bishop of Rome has to say for himself.
Kelly Tootie, we're having a bonus episode today. We're here with Dr. Levi Russell. He discusses economic concepts and current events through the lens of Catholic social teaching on his podcast, the Catholic Economics Podcast. You can find him on Twitter and Gab at Catholic Econ. And he also has a website at theleoinstitute.org, which is the website for the Leonine Institute, if I said that correctly.
Yeah, that's right.
Fantastic. So what are you doing over at the Leo Institute or anything?
So I'm a fellow at the Institute, and the director is a good friend of mine who has a lot of ideas and a lot of different, I guess he has a lot of ideas about how we can improve the world through some kind of Catholic action, and I'm just glad to be a part of it. And right now we're kind of focused on doing a lot of intellectual type stuff. We're trying to get ideas about Catholic social teaching out to a Catholic audience in a different way. And it's kind of interesting because it seems like there's more interest in this lately. Besides podcasts like yours and many others, there's even Catholic Answers is getting in on this kind of thing, which is unusual, I think, for them. But there's a lot of interest out there, I think, in understanding subsidiarity and solidarity, and trying to look at the world through the eyes of Catholic social teaching, rather than trying to, pick and choose things in the church's teaching that fit with, a preconceived ideology. I think Catholics are trying to push that direction. So
yes, I will say the first time I had already reverted back to the Catholic Church, but I think a big aha moment for me, because I was already in love with Christ's bride. I knew that. I couldn't get away from her. I knew I was already in love with the bride, but I think a big aha moment for me was the first time I had ever heard of like Father Pesch. The first time I had ever heard concepts of like solidaritism was in the documentary, The Wolf in Sheep's Clothing. And that was the first time. And I really like that documentary because they had the Pope's actually actor portrayed, and they were reading parts of their encyclical. And it was the first time, even though I was a cradle Catholic, then I left the church and then came back. But it was the very first time I had heard those concepts in a papal encyclical, because for some reason, as laity, I had decided that those were not for me. And and then it was like a puzzle piece all clicking in, because I love how you described it in your podcast as like you hear criticisms from both sides of libertarianism or socialism, and they're only comparing an X and Y axis. And so when I started kind of diving in a little bit more, I'm like, well, what's Catholic social teaching, or what's papal encyclicals? It was really a whole world was open up to me. Like, I've been beating my head against the wall trying to figure out between economics and politics, like what's right, what am I doing? And it's kind of like there's a path already laid out. You just have to know what lens or what Catholic lens to look through it.
Yeah, I totally agree. And this is, it's a challenge, because we're just, anytime you become interested in politics, you're just immersed in whether you pick your side, right? It's all this, really, I think it's all liberal. It's just what component of liberalism are you looking at? Are you looking at the are you looking at the progressive side, or whatever, there's different names for it, right? But are you looking at the postmodernist side, which we often call the left? Or are you looking at the people who are slightly putting the brakes on a little bit, and maybe some of them kind of realizing that the French Revolution was not the best thing in the entire world, and so they're sort of trying to slow down, but they're finding it impossible to do so. And I guess we call that the right. So to me, it's we're in this liberal world, and it's very hard to, I guess, put a Z axis on that political compass, right? And have the ascended view, right?
Yes.
You both mentioned PESH, though. I've heard you talk about it on your podcast, Dr. Russell, and Kat just mentioned it just now. Can you explain to me, who knows absolutely nothing about any of this stuff, what exactly does that mean?
Yeah, so Father Heinrich Pesch was a Jesuit priest, and in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And as a Jesuit of his time and of our time as well, he was a scholar and he was an economist. He was a professional, or to the extent that we had professional economists back then, but yeah, he was trained in economics. And he wrote a book, or a multi-volume series in German called basically as a teaching manual for economics. And it's called a Lehrbuch, which is German for teacher's manual, right? And so he writes this massive multi-volume work, and he's trying to help us understand through his work that economics is shot through with moral implications, and that to properly understand economics as a science, but also economic policy, we have to ground that in something. And to the extent that economics has any kind of moral grounding today, it's a liberal grounding, and whether that's left or right, I don't really care much. But the problem is that it's grounded in a liberal frame, and it's not grounded in something eternal, something lasting like the Catholic faith. And so once you do that, once you understand that you have to have a stable moral framework, Father Pesch's work is very helpful in understanding the Catholic position on these, on economics as a science, and also economics as a policy, a set of policy prescriptions. And he does have a book that is much shorter and easier to read, and it is accessible and available in English. It was translated by a student of his, who named Rupert Ederer, an economist, but not a priest. It's a great read. It's called Ethics in the National Economy. And in it, you get a flavor for what Father Pesch means by what he calls solidarism. And so it's a great, I really recommend it. It's a very short book. It's a very easy read. It's not, back then economists didn't always write in math all the time. So it's very readable and very understandable. What's important with Pesch and solidarism is understanding that, again, we have to ground our understanding of economic policy and things like this in the moral teaching of the church. And so when we're talking about Catholic social teaching more broadly, right, we got abortion and all these other things that we need to talk about. But when we're talking about specifically about economics, we need to understand solidarity and subsidiarity. And as you mentioned, the Leonine Institute, we have our first two issues of our quarterly magazine called Social Justice Quarterly, focused on these two concepts. And so solidarity is much more than just sort of like a mutual fellow feeling, right? Just being happy in some kind of a community or something like this. It's much broader than that, and it includes this idea that the laws of the state, right, and the state has legitimate authority, and the laws of the state should foster that community based on the family as the fundamental unit of society. And so that's what we're really looking for. And so again, this transcends the liberal framework, because, okay, yeah, some of these things might sound like things you would hear from the left because the policies might line up, but the left isn't concerned about the family. Okay, they may have platitudes to that effect, but the left is not interested in the family as the fundamental unit of society. It's inherently individualistic, and especially when you look into this postmodernist stuff that we're dealing with today, it's very obvious. And the right as well. The right often will talk about, the more traditional aspects of the right. Will talk about, the importance of family and all of this sort of thing. But at the same time, that they're not willing to use the legitimate authority of the state to promote the family. And so you really have this strange, thing going on. And I think it's important in understanding solidarity and the policies that it implies, is that, these, from a political perspective, we can have, agreements with people on these types of things. But I think it's very important to not be naive that, just because they're pushing a policy that we like doesn't mean that they're our friends. If they're not on board with us on the fundamentals of the moral teaching of the church, then we should be wary of them. And so, and again, always in a spirit of evangelism, right? Bringing them into the church, but that doesn't mean you become a doormat, right?
Right. I love that you touched on that too, because a lot of comments I would get, especially in October when Fratelli Tutti came out, is I had a lot of traditional friends that would not read it, or they skimmed it, or they already had a preconceived comment before. I'm like, I know you didn't read this. It's 8 chapters and you're already commenting to me about it. But they would say that too, be like, oh, he's just a socialist and things like that. But me, since I've read other encyclicals, I'm like, this is exactly a layering of like Pope Leo the 13th. Like it's not, nothing he's saying is surprising me, because I know what viewpoint he's coming from. So I don't need to look at these things and read it and say, oh, that's socialism. Oh, they're just against this. It's like, no, it's a whole other axis. It's the Z axis that they're not considering when they're critiquing these.
Yeah. And this is the thing, is that this is a mistake I see too much, I think. And look, I'm not a political philosopher, so I'm always speaking under correction with this stuff, but nobody's called me out yet. But look, to me, socialism is not it's not a set of policy prescriptions, right? Policies are legitimate or illegitimate tools, right? They're either, sometimes they're inherently bad, right? There's some policies we just cannot, abide by. But in general, policies are just tools, right? If you got a nail, you use a hammer. If you got a bolt, you use a wrench. But socialism is not a collection of policies. Socialism is an ideology, and it is utterly condemned. And just because, and see, this is the biggest mistake I see with the lefties. What they try to do is they say, "Oh, I'm not a socialist. I'm not in the same vein as all these condemnations that have been given to us," right? Because, like you're saying, Fratelli Tutti. To me, it's again, like you said, it's in this same, it's consistent with the previous encyclicals, and especially the big ones. And when you read it as something that is consistent with those things, then you understand it properly, I think. And this is the challenge we have with, especially the left, because they have the political power. And there's a lot of left-wingers on Catholic Twitter, but what they're doing is what they have done is they are denying all of the materialist and other aspects of socialism that were specifically condemned, along with other aspects of socialism that they still hold on to, while sort of using this postmodernist frame for that. Right. And so what they'll do is, they use the critical theory stuff. They use the deconstructionism. And I'm very grateful. My understanding is we have someone writing a piece on postmodernism for the Leonine Institute, because I think people need to understand this, that when you have someone coming to you saying, we should adopt socialism as Catholics, you need to understand that these days, you're not talking to Joseph Stalin, you're not talking to Karl Marx, you're talking to a postmodernist who believes all kinds of things that are totally contrary to the church. They're just not specifically mentioned in every case in these previous encyclicals that condemned socialism.
I feel too like what I'm kind of seeing is not to let anyone off the hook in this conversation, but the other aspect of it is people, I think, maybe I'm just paying attention to it more, but like I know a lot of my Catholic friends are then spouting off more libertarianism type quotes as a rejection of socialism, but those two were also,
Sure.
Do I say condemned? Like, because I know like the comparison is just like you can't have one extreme to the other, and like so they'll spout off things from like Bastiat where it's the positive and negative functions of law and false philanthropy, and I'm like, okay, if you're going to spout off false philanthropy, then what are you doing to be more charitable? It's like you can't just throw away everything, because then that leaves us with no safety net. And as Catholics, we have Catholic social teaching. You can't just say that the state isn't allowed to do those things.
Right. Yeah, so they're making the same general or fundamental mistake, which is completely buying into a liberal ideology. They're just using one that's a little older, right? The postmodernists are using the latest and most fashionable thing from academia, but the conservatives, or whatever you want to call them, are just using something from, like you said, Bastiat, so the 1700s or whatever. And so again, it's fundamentally, I think it's the same mistake. It's relying on your own liberal political ideology rather than building your ideology on that institution that existed before the French Revolution, before the Protestant Revolution, right? That is what you need to build your perspective on. And it doesn't mean you don't need to understand how to take these other things apart. And I think there's a great example recently. It's hilarious. Yesterday, Dave Ramsey, are you all familiar with Dave Ramsey?
Yeah.
So he was on Fox, I guess. All I saw was the clip on Twitter, and he's like, look, I'm against the stimulus checks because $600 or $1,400 isn't going to help you. If you're already in trouble or whatever, that's not going to do anything. And it's like, yeah, Dave, we know, but it's a Band-Aid. It's a Band-Aid on a bullet when we get it. But like, can you pull the bullet out? Like, can you give us a hand? Like,
right.
And so we agree. It's not going to fix everything, but it might help us get through the next, X amount of time for a lot of people, And so, the whole boomer bootstraps kind of thing. And I saw this fantastic meme, and it was the boomer, and he's like, back in my day, we pulled ourselves up by our bootstraps. And then it's kind of got this big sky, right? And in the sky, there's all these graphs like of, mental health conditions just deteriorating over time, and like the percentage of wealth that Gen X and millennial own, right, versus the boomers, and just all of these societal decline that's happened over the last 50 years. It's like, the bootstraps were a whole lot easier. Bootstraps made a lot more sense in 1960 than they do now, buddy. So anyway,
that's awesome. Liz, I don't have my notes up, but you had a really great question, like, as Catholics, like, how do we?
Yes. Okay. One of the things that I noticed, because I really like reading encyclicals, is that we have things like Rerum Novarum, and that seems to go well with Fratelli Tutti. We have things like Populum Progressio, but then we also have things like Divini Redemptoris, which specifically calls out, speaks communism by name, and so some Catholics who perhaps don't read the whole thing but take sound bites might wonder, what are we supposed to do? What is your opinion of these. We've got popes who seem very socialist and then popes who are clearly anti-communist. How do we reconcile these apparent differences?
Yeah. So I think it goes back to this false reading of the popes. When the popes are saying, for instance, in Rerum Novarum, I mean, this is a great example, is that, now that, this Pope Leo XIII is telling us, now that we live in this age where, people are earning wages in a facility rather than being subsistence farmers or whatever they were, artisans or whatever they were doing before. How are we supposed to deal with this as Catholics, right? And he says, he starts that encyclical out. Okay, let's talk about, the economic situation. The first thing we're going to say is the family, right? That's what we're going to talk about. Mm-hmm. And we're talking about the fact that, a husband should be able to go and earn a wage that is sufficient to care for his family in in sort of an ordinary fashion, right? Not bare subsistence, but in an ordinary fashion. And then, of course, Chesterton popularizes this whole idea of being able to have both wage and capital income, right? Each family should be able to have both of those. And again, this gives us an idea of, what these days, the left wants to call it a living wage, right? Or we might call it, we might emphasize a family wage, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, that sounds terribly socialist to some people, right? But again, this is not socialist because it's not part of the liberal ideology. It's a specific, recommendation or requirement of a just system. And in fact, Pope Leo tells us, that is one of the most one of the easiest ways to tell if you have a just system, right? And so, does this sound socialist? I mean, Elizabeth Warren wrote a book in 2004, called The Two Income Trap, right? And talked about how we need to go back to having a single income household. We need to make that possible again. And of course, you can say that there's, different reasons for that. And maybe we need to adjust our expectations about our consumption and all that sort of thing as well. But, the bottom line is this is what we want, right? And so the Pope is saying policy should deal with this, right? He even says, the government should ensure this in some way, right? So if the system, look, I did my PhD on cooperatives and stuff like that, and I'm all for it. To me, co-ops are the best way to get scale, because we talk about, we need economies of scale. We need economies of scale is good because it makes everybody wealthier, right? You hear that from some people. Mm-hmm. Okay, sure, but we have to do it in a way that allows for sort of local community response. It allows for the building of community. It allows for, ownership, right? And control by more than just the CEO, right? And so I think co-ops are a fantastic way to do that. But if co-ops aren't everywhere, okay, well then maybe what we need is a massive, push by the government to, turn all the corporations into co-ops. I don't know, right? But I'm not glued down by, a liberal ideology to say. So, look, all these other Popular and Progresso and all this stuff. Yeah, we've got to have these condemnations of socialism and communism as ideologies. Yes, definitely. And Fratelli Tutti, I mean, look, you'd be hard pressed, I think, to find a Catholic who's I guess into the whole online world. I mean, Catholics in your parish or whatever, it's a different story, but you'd be hard pressed to find one who just loves and is super excited about, international banking and, large corporations and, aggressive governments like China, right, that are just buying up Africa, right, to use as a slave class, right? I mean, this is horrific, but that's exactly the kind of thing Fratelli Tutti is condemning. I mean, to me, I should have reread my little piece in the Washington Examiner on this. but I wrote a little piece on Fratelli Tutti that, you know, kind of my take on it and just trying to understand what Pope Francis is saying. But basically what he's saying is, look, nations are good, right? You gotta love your country. You gotta love where you come from. And he says, we can't have authentic engagement with other people if we aren't true to ourselves first, right? So of course, you know, nations are wonderful things, you know, and his condemnation of nationalism in there is pretty narrow in my view. I mean, he says, like, you know, don't let nationalism is bad when it lets a bunch of, you know, charlatans in, right? That just use the rhetoric, but don't actually benefit their people.
Yes.
Very extreme nationalism, but he's very pro more moderate nationalism, being just patriotic, some might call it.
Well, right, but I think that I really I was very happy with the parts that he was talking about, where, you know, this idea of authentic encounters, right? When you can't constantly go around bashing your own country all the time. And I mean, you know, we do this a lot, right? There's a lot of people in the U.S. who are like, oh, the U.S. is the worst place in the whole wide world, and blah blah blah, and we're so evil, and this and that and the other. But I mean, look, his condemnation is, look, we can't have international finance. And you know, essentially, I mean, I don't, he doesn't refer to the Chinese government, but I think all of his, this is the other thing, is I think there's kind of a narcissism in the way people read these things.
Absolutely.
They read the Pope telling the whole world something, and they're like, aha, the Pope is really talking about this one thing, right? That you know, the Pope's really talking about Donald Trump, because I know the Pope hates Donald Trump or whatever, right? Well, no, the Pope is condemning actions, right? And he's saying restitution has to be made. I mean, look, we had, you know, the neocons, including Barack Obama and all these other people, just, you know, trying to firebomb the Middle East for like how many decades now? Okay, well, those people need help now. They, you know, and so this is something that Fratelli Tutti is addressing, I think, and we don't help them by, you know, putting a Bank of America on every corner. You know, that doesn't solve any problems.
Because we have talked about that before too. But like, I always describe it starting from the biblical sense. I'm like, when I think of the miracle of the multiplication of the fishes and bread, the first thing Jesus did is he had the disciples go out and put the families in groups of 100. So he developed these parishes on the mount, and then had the disciples, then they were able to figure out what each individual family needed. So by setting them up into groups of families that were manageable, they were able to see the needs that were directly in front of them. And so I'm like, especially when people get so overwhelmed with economics or just get so disheartened, especially like the election this year, I always just say, like, stop focusing on big picture, and you need to just start within the family and then build your way out. So like co-ops, community gardens, what can you do within your local government? Because that's where you're going to make the absolute biggest and best changes. If parishes could do those sort of works together, because the laity are never going to move the scale or tip the scale one way or the other. As much as we talk about the Z-axis or Catholic social teaching, it has to be done in those like inner circle and then outwards.
Yeah, and then that's very much in line with the other principle of Catholic social teaching being subsidiarity, right? That all of these you know, political issues or whatever should be handled at the most local level that is appropriate for them. So of course, we wouldn't expect, you know, each individual family member to deal with you know, something like we call I don't know, international trade or you know, national defense. Well, obviously those things are at the largest level. But like you said, look, if you want to affect policy, if you want to be on you know, at the highest levels of government, well, you know, usually the way you do that is you start out, you know, in your local party, and you build a relationship through the party. And look, if you have it within you to be a great politician, then that's how you build that opportunity. You know, not everybody does. And so I still think we need more people who have the potential to do that, to jump in. But we also, at the same time, like you were talking about parishes. I mean, my goodness, parishes used to be, the center of a community for, of Catholics. And I live in a small town in Kansas, and, there's not a truckload of Catholics in Kansas, but, we have a parish here in town. And, to an extent, it's the center of activity, and we have some things going on, but, there's more things we could be doing. And it just takes, to me, it takes a commitment to your community. It takes a commitment to your location, right? And understanding, again, that like when we teach converts, or we teach kids, about the Pope. And one of the things I like to say is, Jesus knew that, we all have ears, right? So that's how we actually take in information, right? We have ears, or we have eyes to read. And so Jesus knew that we were going to need someone here on earth to teach us, right? Well, in the same way, you have to have a local community of Catholics. You have to have your priest down the street, right? I mean, this is how we live our lives. We live, in our lives in this terrestrial fashion, even in the age of social media. And so, we've got to build these communities, and that is what, like you said, that's what's it's a ground up approach, right? We're going to build up from, improving our location and the community around us.
That also in some ways gives other communities the opportunity to see how it worked, right? So even your small one community thing, if your parish has a program that is incredibly effective, other parishes will then notice that. So even the things you do on a small and local level don't end up being so.
Right. And again, this is one of the great functions of, your diocese, right? So Archbishop Naumann here in Kansas City, very famous for his role in the life marches and stuff like this, but he's just our, a giant of a man too. My goodness. He's this immense presence, he's in that role, right? He has people that work for the diocese, and they're coordinating amongst all the parishes. Right down the road here, out here in rural Kansas, we have a fantastic facility for just this outdoor type activities and that kind of thing. And there's a chapel and all that, and from all over the diocese, especially in Kansas City, they come out from the city, and they come out here, and they see all this open space that we have. And to me, this is such a wonderful thing, right? So that we have our local communities, but then we have those people that, that are at these sort of progressively larger, political levels that are facilitating and coordinating activities amongst all of these little parishes. So yeah, you're right. And as we see consolidation, I mean, my goodness, there's a parish just north of me that's now, probably 3 parishes have kind of come together into this one town, because these small towns they're disappearing. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, you got to have one building now, because that's the only thing that makes sense. But they have a fantastic young priest. He's a couple of years older than me, I think, in his mid to late 30s probably, but just a wonderful place. And they're doing a lot of great things because they're pooling, 3 parishes worth of, money and stuff like that. So.
Wow. No, that sounds amazing. And yeah, I've always had really good parishes, especially in my adult life, like growing, or like as soon as my kids were born and things like that, you just naturally start taking it more seriously, I guess. And so we've always found really good parishes, but actually the location that Liz and I are in Iowa, it's really like the same as you. I've never seen a more vibrant Catholic community as our area. And I travel a lot, and I think that's happening everywhere. Like there might have been an exodus a decade ago, but the people that stayed or the people that are reverting back, it's like churches are starting to be like on fire again. So I can see that need for that parish and community and things like that are starting to pick up steam, especially in our area, like Catholic homeschooling. Not to be hard on our private school system.
Private institutions.
I'm like, how should I say this? But yeah, it's like I think there's also a push for Catholic homeschooling because a lot of them are describing like some of their Catholic schools in the area are more almost like a secular charter school. Like they still like the layout and the curriculum, but it's not necessarily like, it's not necessarily as traditional or orthodox as they'd like to learn. Because like I went to a private Catholic school, and once again, I never even heard of a papal encyclical or anything like that. So it's just, it's just like starting those parishes are starting to build those communities of people that are coming back saying, no, I want more. Like I want more information. I want more community. I want more fellowship. Like it's really starting to pick up.
Yeah. And this is a great, this is another opportunity that a lot of dioceses are seizing on is to help build the youth through these schools. I mean, for instance, here in our diocese, you can essentially send your kid to school for free. I mean, and in our parish, we only have a grade school, but it's, if you can't afford it, you sit down, you figure, you talk to them about what you can do, and you pay what you can. There's a fee. They have a fee on the website. And the people who, we don't have another private school in our little town here, and so there's actually quite a few kids who go to our parish school that aren't Catholic.
Right.
And they have to pay more, which is great. I love that. But yeah, if you're Catholic and you can't afford it, they will figure it out. But yeah, I agree. And the whole things that are going on today, I don't know if you're supposed to use the word, right? Social media clampdowns, but it's definitely encouraging people to figure out how to do the homeschool thing, and so that's a wonderful effect of all this, I think.
Well, we are going to wrap up here, but let's you mentioned a book earlier, and you mentioned that it was both short and not too terribly difficult to read. So yes. I would love to hear the title of that one again. And if you have any other recommendations for people who are, don't know a whole lot about this subject, but they're starting to understand that maybe, when you're talking about policy earlier, it seemed like a broken clock is right twice a day. So if you're listening to politicians and lawmakers, well, a law can be virtuous, but perhaps don't swallow all of it.
Right.
If you want to learn more about that Z-axis, what would you recommend?
Sure. So, so the book is called Ethics in the National Economy by Father Heinrich Pesch. So that I would recommend. You can find it online. You're probably going to have to get it from an online retailer. Don't go to Amazon because it's not on there really. There's some small Catholic retailers that have it. So just I'll tell you what. Here's the thing. On the Leonine Institute website, if you go to About Us, there is a list of books with links to the easiest way to get it. And sometimes we got to pay Jeff Bezos for it, but whatever. But there's a list of books there, and one of them is Ethics in the National Economy. Also, check out the magazine that we're doing. It's free. There's no cost. If you want to donate to, help the Institute pay the people who write the short articles for it. We have, they have PayPal up and everything like that, but, magazine's free, and we just put out our second issue, and the third issue is on the family. So if you want to write for us, we would love to have that as well. So check out the articles in that. Check out our other policy papers and stuff. If you're kind of more, you kind of like the wonky stuff, the wonkish policy stuff, we have some policy papers and stuff up there. We have a great one, I think, on usury. Now I'm an author on it, so a little biased, but and then the other
honest bias is okay.
Yeah, there you go. Right. Yeah. At least it's a disclaimer, right? And then the other thing that I'm personally offering. So Father Heinrich Pesch, his primary student who went on to kind of build on his legacy was Father Bernard Dempsey, who was, I believe, at St. Louis University. And so he wrote a bunch of journal articles, right? So then we get into the time frame in the economics profession when we start seeing journal articles and less books. So I have a bunch of his journal articles that I can give you. If you just, I'll send you the Drive link and you can download all those journal articles. And then Rupert Ederer, who was the one who translated Pesch's work into English, and then also did a lot of his own work.
Can I just say, I love your essential reading segment. And when I actually got a little emotional when you talking about Ederer, because when you were describing that, like he did not take on translating Pesch's work for so long until he was staring at like this whole set of Marxist translated set, and then he kind of was staring at like, how can someone like Pesch not have been translated to English? So we have all these other things. So I was like, that kind of got me a little emotional.
And imagine like translating thousands and thousands and thousands of pages, right? I mean, that's what he did. And he passed, I think about 10 years ago, but he's hoping that, someday that, he's predicting that there's going to be economists who are going to want to come back to this kind of thing. And I'm hoping to be part of that myself, just shifting my focus and my work and my own research and stuff into that area. But yeah, like I said, Rupert J. Ederer is another, he's got some stuff out there too. So if you want those kind of journal article-y things, send me an email. I'll give you my email address for the Leo Institute, so they can request that.
And all this will be in the show notes.
Yeah, my socials too. I'll give you my social stuff. So, yeah.
That sounds great. Yeah, because like you guys have to go and you have to check out the Catholic Economist podcast, because not only does he have these great roundtables, but Dr. Russell also does essential reading where he reads to you these documents. So a lot of times, like, people may not have the time to sit down and read these, but to be able to pop in your headphone and go about your day as Dr. Russell's reading to you, it's like a great way to kind of absorb some of these concepts.
I appreciate
Absolutely
that.
Helpful. Also, personally recommend episode 71 if you want to hear him talk more about Fratelli Tutti. I loved every minute. Maybe you will too. And so thank you so much for joining us today. And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast. Check out Dr. Russell's podcast and rate and leave reviews on both. Thank you so much and have a great day. Thanks for joining us this week on For Pete's Sake, as we explore the words of Pope Francis in Fratelli Tutti.
Find For Pete's Sake on Facebook and Instagram.
You can find links to Fratelli Tutti and some of our sources in the show notes. See you next week. St. Peter,
Ora pro nobis.